Good afternoon and welcome to the Gold Goats and Guns Hour here on YouTube and DLive. My name is Tom Luongo. I hope you're all having a great afternoon. Just getting everything set up, waiting for a couple of people to get into the stream before we get fully started. We got a lot to talk about today. Today I want to talk about what's going on in German politics. This will probably feel just a little presumptuous on my part. I'm not going to tell you that I'm an expert in what's happening in Germany and German politics, but I have been covering it for so long that I've had a number of people help to keep me informed of some of the subtleties of the things that have been going on in Germany and the political changes that have been going on in Germany over the course of the last couple of years. So in the wake of the European parliamentary elections, we have a lot to talk about, given the results. So before we get started too far down the line, while we wait for some people to get into the stream, you can find my work over tomluongo.me. You can also find me regularly on around Fridays or Saturdays at moneyandmarkets.com, as well as over at strategicculture.org as well. So and you can also donate to the stream and give a like and subscribe down below if you would be so kind. That would be great. All right, so and all the links are down below. All right, so let's get started. So I'm not really done with covering the European parliamentary elections. I've done some streams about Matteo Salvini. We've talked about Brexit. We've talked about a lot of things in previous streams. You can find all those on this channel. And I've covered it in detail on a number of different live streams, a number of different blogs. And I've got an article in the editorial, or soon to be an editorial, for Strategic Culture talking about what's particularly going on in Germany. And I currently have an article over there called "The Center Isn't Holding in Europe." It's not holding in Germany either. And actually, Germany, I think, is emblematic of everything, of the trends that are occurring within European politics, that they're becoming radicalized by both the radical left and the radical, for lack of a better term, the radical left and the radical right both made significant gains at this year's parliamentary elections. So it's important to kind of look at that. And like I said, I think Germany is emblematic of this shift. And it played itself out with the Green Party kind of achieving nationwide, getting more than 20% of the vote and putting significant pressure on the Social Democrats, which has already claimed its first political casualty. The short-lived tenure as leader of the SPD, Andrea Nelles, stepped down earlier in the week after she took over from Martin Schulz, after he ran a perfectly miserable campaign in 2017, allowing Angela Merkel to just barely squeak together and form a coalition after about 4 months worth of wrangling to get the current grand coalition across the line and in place. Now, that grand coalition, every time Merkel has put that grand coalition together, and what I mean by that is it's a center-right, center-left coalition between Merkel's CDU and CSU of Bavaria and the Social Democrats on the other side. And what's important is to understand is that coalition is having the effect of not standing for anything except more EU integration and more transnational policies that put Germany second and the EU first. And that's radicalizing both the left and the right. We're seeing the rise of Alternative for Germany at the same time as we're also now seeing the rise of the Greens. Now, the Greens took Berlin in the European parliamentary elections. And then they also took a state far to the north, and I cannot remember the name of it, along with Hamburg. While Alternative for Germany took the surrounding Brandenburg and Saxony. And you can see where Alternative for Germany has been regularly polling above 20% now in most of what is the old East Germany, and very much a kind of a bastion of ethnic Germans who were very upset with Merkel's immigration policy, which let 1 million people into the country. And so it's important to understand that that's where Alternative for Germany is coming from, but it's also important to understand it's where Alternative for Germany needs to rise above, because that's not enough to turn this into a social movement, right? That's not enough to be the initial rise of the Greens above their 5% baseline. Same thing with Alternative for Germany. Came fully as a protest against Merkel, or in the case of Alternative for Germany, but in the case of the Greens, it was a revolt against the Social Democrats playing second fiddle to Merkel and not advancing their agenda, the hard left agenda. But look what's happened. A year ago, Alternative for Germany, we were all talking about it here, was polling as high as 18%, while the Greens were still polling 12, 13, and they were beginning to rise. And both major parties were taking a dip while these other two parties rose. But after the political fallout between the CSU and the CDU last year over immigration, where Horst Seehofer, the leader of the CSU from Bavaria, stepped down as leader of the party, and there was all this drama. Eventually, Merkel shifted her immigration policy, and that helped blunt the rise of Alternative for Germany, because what happened now? She started to, as always, the major parties started to adopt the signature issue of the upstart from that side of the political spectrum. It's no different than the Republicans, for example, embracing a lot of the ideas of the House of the Senate Freedom Caucus, or the Tea Party, or the Libertarians, or whatever they need to in order to blunt any rise of an alternative voice, right? And this is normal. And so over the course of this past year, you've seen Alternative for Germany's support bleed back down to lower levels, down around 12% nationally. The Greens, on the other hand, pushed through the 16% barrier and are now polling at 20%, while the Social Democrats, the SPD, are now down below 16%, or at least they polled right at 16% in the European parliamentary elections. So now there's this possibility that the SPD could completely collapse, that the Social Democrats could become a minor party by the time the next election comes around. That could easily, which is in 2021. But all of this is now creating great speculation as to whether or not Angela Merkel will be able to keep this coalition together. And so we're going to see what happens when the SPD chooses its new leader, and whether or not they can keep the coalition together. Because if you look at the way that the polling is laying out in Germany, there's no one political faction that could in any way command a majority. It's the same problem that Merkel had back in 2017, that the only two parties that could even work together to form a government, as tenuous as it is, was the current Grand Coalition, which had weakened significantly. So, and the Social Democrats, the SPD, were loath to even sign on to it. It's only from external pressure of EU forces from the outside that actually got that done. Okay, there's a lot of external pressure being put on the political establishment in Germany to maintain the status quo, to keep the path to European integration into the EU. And that political and military integration is to continue proceeding at pace. It's part of the reason why Brexit is being fought so hard. It's why Theresa May has worked so hard to try and get her withdrawal deal across the finish line, because she's already signed multiple treaties with the EU for signing away Britain's ability to defend itself, obligating Britain's military and intelligence assets to the European Union. So that further complicates the whole Brexit process, but that's a different story for a different day. But but in the broad strokes, that's what's been happening with the Grand Coalition. It's continually weakened over time as the people just reject this. The hard left of the Greens, the progressive Greens, and who are, by the way, the most hawkish and the most hawkish of all of the European Green parties. They're incredibly aggressive in wanting to create societal change through the political process. Okay? They're incredibly ideologically driven people. Much more so than a lot of other Green parties. Remember, there are two different Green parties in the European Union, in the European Parliament. There's the kind of hawkish one led by the Germans, and then there are other ones that are a little bit more Eurosceptic. And there's the other one, I can't remember the names of. There's the New Green Alliance, and then there's the Greens, I think is the way it works. And they have very different platforms. The one can almost be considered Eurosceptic in some ways. So this result now has put Merkel's coalition in serious trouble. I don't know that there's any what's the word I'm looking for? Any imminent danger of it collapsing. Because again, when you look at the polling results, what's going to happen? We call a snap election, and we have an even worse scenario than we had in October 2017 after the last general election. Because Merkel's only, the CDU, CSU is only polling 28%. The Greens are polling 20%. They're not going to be able to, they couldn't get a quote unquote Jamaica style coalition together 2 years ago. They're not going to get one now. Merkel's not going to be willing to give up enough power to satisfy the Greens. Now that's, 47, 48%, then another 5% from the FDP, the Free Democrats, which are another small leftist party. That would get them across the finish line. They call that Jamaica for the three different colors that they're usually represented, which they represent the three colors of the Jamaican flag, FYI. But on the other side, on the right, there's Alternative for Germany. There's Der Linke. That's only, 20% maximum. But in East Germany, that's enough, more than enough, to govern. And so you've got very interesting problems occurring here, and a very interesting split that's happening. And as the center collapses in Germany, and here's an interesting story for you. So, like I said earlier, the AfD won both Brandenburg and Saxony, right? Well, in Saxony, in one town in Saxony, or one district and council in Saxony, local council in Saxony, they won 7 seats. I was reading an article in The Guardian just now. They won 7 seats, but they only had 5 candidates on the ballot. So Merkel's CDU wound up taking the other 2 seats because the AfD didn't have enough candidates, because there's a significant social stigma still associated with standing for the AfD, which is in many ways still blunting its ability to grab hold of a larger swath of the German electorate. And therefore, it's going to be incredibly difficult for them to ever govern in any way in the near future. So I don't expect to see anything really change by 2021 unless the German economy begins to collapse in the short run. So what we've got now is we've got this kind of mishmash. It almost looks like, it looks very similar. The situation in Germany looks very similar to what's going on in Spain. There's like 6 parties. They all have double digit support, and no one, and it's very difficult to put a coalition together. Actually, in Spain, it's getting a little bit better. They're coalescing around a harder left government in Spain. Merkel's going to have to give up a lot to maintain power between now and 2021, because it's very likely that by the end of this year, when we see the results from the Brandenburg, Saxony, and I wrote it 16 times this morning. I can't remember the other name. There's 3 states that are going to have elections later this year, and Thuringia. Sorry. So Brandenburg, Saxony, and Thuringia will be going to the polls for their state elections. So it's the equivalent of Florida going to the polls to elect governors and town councils and county governments and whatnot. That happens in early September 1st in Brandenburg and Saxony, and October 27th in Thuringia. So when those are going to determine whether or not alternative for Germany is going to be able to raise their profile between now and then. And if this is going to be a sustainable process, where their job between now and then is to broaden their message, I think. And I've been saying this for over a year, to broaden their message. And now start attacking Merkel where she's weak, which is on the economy. Because the German economy, I've written about this before, and the numbers keep bearing itself out. We just saw the latest PMI figures; they're terrible, right? Auto sales are terrible. Everything is bad. The German economy is on the verge of complete collapse, relatively speaking. It's going into recession, and Merkel can be hung with that. And both the Greens and AfD can attack her and further split the country and further split people away from the center. It's going to put even more pressure on Bavaria to give up their coalition with Merkel. It's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. So but the big one is that social stigma for AfD, because if you look at it, it's a party that's only like 6 years old. So it's got a lot to learn. They've all got a lot to learn. And both, the Greens and AfD are going to have to work really hard. And they're going to have to work really hard to learn how to govern properly. And Stoyanovich is reminding me, and I've been saying this, and I think you and I have been saying the same thing for a while now, they will be a non-entity as a driving political force until they take some other stand other than opposing Merkel. One way would be to eliminate Russian sanctions. I agree. It would be a brilliant move on their part to then move to saying, look, our economy has been nothing but hurt by the sanctions on Russia. It's been not good for German businesses. It would play well in Bavaria. It's already played well in Bavaria for them. They've gotten some traction there as well, but they need to push through the 20% barrier beyond just Saxony and Brandenburg. And they need to start really talking about how they can improve the welfare of Germans, if not be it some form of tax cut or whatever. That's what they have to start worrying about. That they have to start branding themselves better, and they have to do a better job of their messaging. Otherwise, they're going to this will be as high as they ever get, and some other party will come in and from the right and eat their lunch. So Ryan was asking me, where do I get my German news from? From a variety of sources. From German newspapers, which are all horribly regime oriented. I understand that the German media, daily media like Die Welt and Der Spiegel and whatnot, are all they're as bad as the Washington Post, the BBC, the New York Times, CNN, and the rest of them. They're terrible. But you also get the news from other places. And mostly, I just did the research this morning to figure out what was happening. I went and looked at the election results in various newspapers and Wikipedia and whatnot, and went on from there. So it's so Jonathan's asked me why Bavaria has clung to Merkel's party as long as it has, because there's no other real good alternative for them. Bavaria wants access to power. They have the leadership of the CSU is just as wedded to the long-term German establishment and German industrial establishment base, and that's where Merkel has, for the most part, taken good care of them. You have to understand that. Remember, she's aligned European Union policy with what's good for Germany. Remember, she's the driving force behind the kind of austerity that is forced upon countries like Greece and Italy and Spain and Portugal and the rest of them. So it's not like the CSU hasn't benefited from this relationship with Merkel, and if anything, they benefited greatly. But the Russian sanctions have hurt Bavaria strongly, and that's why it's actually caused some rifts within the coalition. So Java Soapboxer says that if Germany needs to decide if Russia is an enemy or not, they don't consider Russia an enemy, but Germany Germany has, as always, has imperial ambitions via the EU to be a major player. It's just that simple. And Merkel's not going to give that up. And the people who are behind Angela Merkel aren't going to give that up. And they're going to do whatever they have to do to keep both Russia and the United States on the hook for as long as they can while they try and, wheedle their way into a better position. It's not going to work. Merkel's actually going to go down as one of the worst leaders in history for having put Germany in an untenable position, having to choose between Russia and the United States and waiting too long to choose Russia over the United States. Mark my words. I'm not aware of any. Yeah, I don't think of Stoyanovich is saying that Merkel is also stuck. She doesn't want to turn power over to her German male. Notice all the people that we've been talking about. Merkel heads the CSU. She has tried to hand the party over to Anna Krank-Karrenbauer unsuccessfully. Martin Schulz handed it over to Andrea Nellis unsuccessfully. So now what? So yeah, I mean, that's part of the problem. Ultimately, and I agree with Jabba Soapbox saying the ultimate irony is that Merkel had the capability of becoming one of the greatest leaders in history. Of course she did. But she's wedded to she's an old Stasi. She's an old commie. She's wedded to the Marxist philosophy that underlines the EU. She's absolutely happy with the EU SSR that's being built, along with the rest of the European intellectuals who fundamentally believe at their core they've always been commies. They've always been in their own way this kind of common turn. I use that term because it's kind of being misapplied here. But the British establishment feels the same way. They're all these horrible freaking moldy old commies from of the ideological variety, and they've just they just know that they can't get their agenda passed without lying. It's just that simple. So, Jonathan says the base of the CDU started drifting populist right, especially in Eastern Germany. Well, that's what the AfD is. So the problem is that Merkel. So you think this through, right? What if in the fall, AfD wins the election in Brandenburg, going away with like 35%. Nobody else gets above 20. Okay, who's gonna because they're polling at I think they took 26 or 28% in Brandenburg and Saxony this past week. So in the European parliamentary elections, think through that they are able to add to those numbers and get up to 35. Where are they going to get the other 15% if none of the other parties will form a coalition with them? There isn't 15% to be had. All the minor parties together plus the Free Democrats doesn't get them close to 45%, 50%. And that's the problem. Yeah, I saw that, Stoyanovich. So Stoyanovich is reminding us that Fort Russ News has reported that a German-Russian business center, a new chamber of commerce, is opening up in Moscow. That may be a sign that the sanctions are going to end. I think that ultimately they're going to wind up being a quid pro quo between Merkel and Salvini. Merkel wants to end the sanctions, but as I've written about this in other places, Merkel wants to end the sanctions, but she can't do so until there's some movement on Ukraine. She's made she's made it abundantly clear that she will not lift the sanctions until a new gas transit contract between Naftogaz and Gazprom is signed, that Ukraine has some form of income coming in through the gas transit. They want at least some of that restored. They want a new contract there. Moreover, there has to be some way to deal with the Donbass within the confines of the Minsk II Accords, which of course the United States is doing everything it can to get its hooks into new Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and stop that process. So in order to keep the sanctions on Russia, in order for this to none of this to ever end. So it's all sitting here waiting to happen, but all it takes is one asshole, frankly. And I look at Matteo Salvini and I know that he doesn't want to rock the boat too hard. He knows that he's going to continue to try and play the game within the structure of the European Union for as long as he can. So I don't know about Russian sanctions at this point. I really don't. They should be lifted. The German economy needs them to be lifted. Merkel's been able to get away with not lifting them because the German economy has been limping along, doing relatively well. But now, with Brexit on the horizon in October 31st, and the potential for a no-deal Brexit still on the table, if not more so than ever before, because now there's the possibility that Nigel Farage could become prime minister, it's only going to hurt the Germans more. 6 months down the line, we're looking at even more. We're looking at even more of this dollar illiquidity stuff, this emerging market, a global slowdown, all of the other things. So all of this is coming to crash right on Merkel's head between now and the beginning of 2020. And it's pretty obvious the next 6 months, 7 months or so are going to be hell for her. And all I can hope is that the leadership of Alternative for Germany are ready and stand ready to make significant gains and solidify the gains that they currently have. And I see that article in The Guardian, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me. You can't get 7 people to sit on a local council board. Is Merkel still pushing Ukraine to be a member of the EU? No, Merkel's not. NATO is. And yes, of course they are. The IMF is done supplying money to the Ukrainians, and that's why Zelensky's got to turn to the United States directly. Ukraine should pay what they owe Russia, says Stephen Rollins. Last I heard, they owe billions. Well, that would be nice. That's part of the problem. Gazprom's more than willing to come to the table and cut a deal. And Putin's even said this to Merkel. He's like, I'm not the one not willing to come to the table. Alexei Miller, the CEO of Gazprom and the Russian energy minister, will sit down and cut a deal with Naftogaz tomorrow. It's Naftogaz that won't come to the table. It's all about the Ukraine. The Ukrainian political quagmire is insane, and so Merkel has to continue virtue signaling about all of the things that to make herself continue to look like she can exit the position that she put herself in and save face. She doesn't want to leave the Ukraine situation without saving face. That's the problem. There are too many, and there's too many cross currents and too many virulently Russophobic members of Europe and European Parliament and political figures in Europe that don't want the sanctions lifted. So all right, well, Stephen Rollins, I beg to differ. I think that Farage will likely win the next election and could win it with a big enough majority that that he won't need to form a coalition with anybody. If you look at the current polling, he's polling about Brexit right now is polling around 320 seats. And Jeremy Corbyn, I notice, is not calling for snap elections today, not calling for a vote of no confidence as British Parliament gets seated. They're scared to death of what they're seeing. The two-party state is collapsing. Labour and the Conservatives are collapsing. I agree that Farage is a necessary evil job of soapbox. There's many things about Nigel Farage's stances on foreign policy, for example, that I do not agree with. I listened to his radio show enough to know that he's I don't agree with him about Iran, for example. But regardless of that, he's absolutely the right guy in this order of operations to get Brexit done and to get the Brits out from underneath all of this and to reform the British political system and take on the British deep state. The right-wing Ukrainians are trying to start a war in Kharkov, and there was a pro-Russian party meeting. If the polls translated into MPs right now, because I've already seen the numbers, right? The latest opinion polls, not only did they give you numbers across the board, like the general numbers for Brexit, but they also drilled in to say, where those numbers came from. And those numbers would imply around 320 seats as of right now, with only a 4% lead over Labour, 26 versus 22. That moves to 30%. And if you look at the results from the European parliamentary election, I think the European elections would have had Farage's party taking 414 seats out of 650 or 620, because you don't really count the 30 for Northern Ireland, for the for you don't really count the ones that Sinn Féin of Ireland controls. All right. I don't want to turn this into a Brexit thing, though. So I'm at 30 minutes. It's about time for me to pop off. Just one last thing. I understand, and I know that people vote. So Steve Rollins is saying he understands that people vote different in the European elections than they do in the local elections. But what's happening here is something fundamentally different, and the polling results now are perfect. Now the polling results are starting to show that there's something else happening here that's far deeper than the normal ebb and flow of a poor result for the Conservatives, for example, in the European parliamentary elections. This is far deeper than that. Brexit has completely destroyed the center of British politics as well. It's completely realigned it. I got it from Britain Elects and the various polling places. So it's in my Twitter feed on TFL1728. All right, so I've got to run. I don't really want to go much longer than this, but if you guys like what you heard today, that'd be great. Give a like and subscribe down below. I'd really appreciate it. If you would do me a favor as well, consider supporting the channel and supporting my work directly. There's plenty of ways to donate down below. You even got a swag shop over on Cafe Press, so you can get yourself some goat love if you want. Other than that, I'm pretty good. I'll probably be back Thursday afternoon. I'm thinking. I don't know. I don't think I'll have time tomorrow. So thinking Thursday afternoon, I'll probably do one of these some right around the same time, right around 2 o'clock or so. So you guys take care. You have a great afternoon. We'll talk soon. Keep your stick on the ice.